So we got a little shakeup in the wide receiver room. So let's go over all of it here on the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in, everybody, to another episode of Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. You can find the show on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. And thanks so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day, even when technical difficulties make it so the podcast has to come out later than usual, which is what happened yesterday. But if you did miss that episode, it is up now. Or maybe you could have just come and found it on YouTube at the normal time it always is, which is 11 a.m. Central. So anyways, let's talk about Albert Wilson and the Vikings signing a new guy, and also some news about Ihmir Smith-Marsette, which we should probably start with. So this came out in a weird way. Usually with injuries, they can come out kind of by virtue of, wait, this guy didn't show up for training camp, and then people noticing that and then asking the coaches, and then they have to like say something. But this was always a frustrating thing with Zimmer because he wouldn't say anything, and he'd say like, well, I don't know, he's just not here, like, get over it. And people would think he was being like really mean to the player, but really it was just, something like Mike Harris's situation kind of played out that way, where he basically was like, please stop asking. And so kind of no matter the severity of the injury, somebody could not show up for camp and they could be bruised, or they could not show up for camp and they could have torn their ACL. But this time we actually got some information. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say Ihmir Smith-Marsette probably won't be at camp. He was spotted at a charity baseball game put on by Adam Thielen and his foundation, which is pretty dope. And looked very fun. Looked like they were having a great time there. But in the footage of all the players rushing onto the field to celebrate a home run, Ihmir Smith-Marsette came limping out in what some people call a walking boot. Man, that looked like a full-on leg brace to me. But I don't want to play Twitter doctor. But either way, I mean, he was very clearly unable to like bend his leg and limping really hard, and he looks pretty seriously hurt. So I have now look, there's a long time between now and camp, right? It is June 1st. Camp is until the end of July. So there's time to heal if this is the kind of thing. I mean, think about an injury that would knock you out for like 8 weeks of the season, and then you can maybe make it back for the playoffs. And if that kind of injury happened to him in October, maybe if that's the timeline, then maybe there's a chance. But I'm going to go ahead and not hold my breath and wait for us to get more information. All I know is it looked pretty rough, and they might be down a wide receiver. So that kind of explains why they were sniffing around wide receivers all of a sudden, with Dede Westbrook and Albert Wilson both came in for a workout. The Vikings offered Dede Westbrook. He did not respond in time, and then they signed Albert Wilson. It's the way the game goes, man. You snooze, you lose. So Albert Wilson, new Viking. We got to talk about him. He's a very interesting case because he's a guy that, at full disclosure, I have loved Albert Wilson for a while. I kind of fell in love with him right when he signed with the Dolphins, and nobody really noticed because it was 2018 and the Dolphins were basically nothing worth paying attention to. And so they signed him to a reasonable free agent deal, and he actually was like, I remember watching a Dolphins game or two in the early 2018 and being like, well, who is this dude? This little 5'9" guy kind of rips. And then he hurt his hip, and that knocked him out for the whole season, and then he couldn't stay healthy in 2019, and then he opted out in 2020, and then in 2021, he had like the worst season of his career. So he basically, his whole career has just like gone off the rails. And so this is a bit of a reclamation project thing. So how I would say it affects the Vikings depth chart is probably, from the way the coaches talk about it, they seem a lot higher on BC Johnson than I thought they were. So I kind of have to move him up. And so you probably have that as a main four. Thielen, Jefferson, Osborne is your main three, and then I think BC Johnson seems like he's kind of in pole position to get that fourth spot. Long camp, a lot can happen, but it seems like where it's at right now. And then 5 and or 6 is kind of a glut of Albert Wilson and Jalen Naylor, and if Dan Chisena wants to, he could make it on special teams, and like kind of all these other guys. And I think Wilson goes directly into that. I probably am going to put him in the roster bubble category of the roster. Like, I don't think he's as much of a long shot as like an undrafted rookie would be. But I don't think this dude, like, I wouldn't put your wide receiver 3 expectations on him as much as I love this dude. I'm like super enamored, and I'm like actually pretty stoked that he's a Viking, because I kind of also think that like the derailing of his career, he really was on the verge of breaking out in 2018. And then his whole thing derailed due to a lot of stuff outside his control, injuries, COVID, and all that. Like that really messed with him. And so I do think that there's a decent chance, like, if you're going to take a long shot on somebody, take a long shot on somebody that's proven that they've got a little juice in the past. And the reasons that they don't have the juice now are like understandable. So I'm into it. I like the signing, even if he doesn't make the team. I still like the signing. I think it's worth a shot. He's making like veteran minimum benefit, like total negligible cash, and nothing guaranteed or anything. So if he doesn't make the team, they basically didn't spend a dime on him. I want to talk a little bit though about kind of what it means to go from Ihmir Smith-Marsette to Albert Wilson, and just like making that transition in the group. Even if Wilson doesn't make the team, like, just there's a very different skill set there. And Ihmir Smith-Marsette is a member of the old regime, the old coaching staff, the old GM and stuff. And they might be building something new and going for one of those like more after catch type guys. So I want to talk about that, and I also want to tell you a story later in the show. A shorter story, but I do want to tell it to you. But first, let me talk to you about the best tasting protein bar on the planet. It's Built Bar, and you know all about by now. You know about their Built Puffs. But if you don't know about their Built Puffs, that is their marshmallowy kind. It tastes like something you get on Easter. I don't know, they like whip air into the collagen protein or something, and they make it taste like a marshmallow covered in chocolate bar. Absolutely delicious. And their newest kind is brownie batter puffs, which the reviews are in, y'all. It is unbelievable. Everybody who, even people who like were kind of not that into the idea of protein bar that tastes like a candy bar, are like, yeah, okay, but this one rocks. So go get your brownie batter puffs. Still, it's brownie batter marshmallow bar, and it's like 9 grams of sugar in that thing, and the calories, 100 and some calories, something like that. It is great, and it's not going to knock you off the wagon. So head on over to built.com. Enter promo code LOCKED15. You can get 15% off of your order. That's LOCKED15 at built.com. Thanks again for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. I have a quick favor to ask you. We at Locked On have put together a little survey, a listener survey, so that you can tell us how to make Locked On podcasts better. This is your opportunity to tell us as an entire network what you like and don't like about Locked On Podcasts. So go to lockedonpodcast.com/survey right now to get started. Doesn't take you very long. And if you complete the survey, you qualify for a chance to win one of 10 $100 Ticketmaster gift cards. Just take our audience survey. Go to lockedonpodcast.com/survey. Thank you so much for your help. Let me talk to you now about what I think what we're getting a sense, I guess, for Kevin O'Connell's offense. And I just kind of want to ramble on that real quick and iron out my thoughts live in front of you, which is honestly what like 80% of this podcast is. So Albert Wilson is not your typical wide zone, bootleg city Kubiak style wide receiver. The best Kirk Cousins has been here in Minnesota, I think by a mile, was 2019. Everybody agrees with that. I mean, that was the year where he actually, he deserved to be in the Pro Bowl that year. And a big part of that was that a lot of the concepts, a lot of the shot plays stapled to bootlegs were just really working. And a lot of that was you needed deep receivers. You needed Diggs and Thielen running downfield, at the peak of their power, catching 40-yard bombs. And Kirk Cousins would be able to roll out to his left, turn his shoulders, and throw to the left. And defenses just don't account for guys to be able to do that, because honestly, that's Kirk Cousins' superpower. And that was like the best fit for him, and it was all very good. And this is a very different approach. I don't know if I have a great sense for how this is going to be for Kirk Cousins, which I guess is fine, because that obviously got figured out and the next 2 years were total catastrophes. So I'm game for new ideas. But this seems like it's going to be a lot more after catch dependent. And I think the interest in guys like Albert Wilson Less so D.D. Westbrook. He was more of a burner. But Albert Wilson once called himself the Yak King, which was very funny, and it like led to a whole thing with Golden Tate back in that time. But he's also like he's a 7-year veteran, by the way. Like this is not like a young dude with potential. It's just a guy that I think has a turnaround maybe in him, even though he's 30. I think he has the ability to like turn it around and become a rosterable guy, but that's not guaranteed. That's like where I'm at on Albert Wilson. My heart wants to be so much higher on him. Because I just am so enamored with this stupid like 5'9" dude that was catching like bombs from Ryan Tannehill. Yeah, from Ryan Tannehill. But this seems like it's going to be closer to what like Pat Shurmur was doing. And I think in particular, it sounds a lot like the way Kevin O'Connell talks about his offensive philosophies and the personnel they've gotten and the way that they're approaching things and talking about how it's going to affect players and stuff. I'm piecing a lot together and I'm being really, really speculative here. But this is going to sound weird. Bear with me. It sounds like they really aren't going to be like a play action 7-step drop team anymore. That's going to make things easier on the O-line, and I think that's why Kevin O'Connell has said stuff on multiple occasions like, we think this will help Bradbury, and we're going to kind of give him a chance in this system. And why there are things like Dalvin Cook lining up out wide, which is not that weird of a thing, but putting a running back in a bunch formation and stuff is a really good way to kind of horizontally stretch the defense. I talked about that in a previous episode. I'm pretty sure that's like in the title, Dalvin Cook at wide receiver. So you can go listen to that for more detail. But basically, it's a good way to like horizontally stretch a defense. And if you're horizontally stretching a defense, that means guys don't have to run very deep before there's a hole in the zone, and they can all turn around, and you can get a nice, easy 5-yard pass on a 3-step drop. And it can be really quick, and that can really help a lot of the struggling offensive line. So this is like a sort of a low-key way to help protect the protection, I guess, if you protect the pass protection from its own failures. And part of that is the ball's out quickly, so you have to block for less. But also part of that is because you know the ball will be out quickly, you can do more like aggressive sets that don't last as long, but are really good at that first punch. And those things can be really helpful. So yeah, that's, I think, where they're headed with this stuff, and getting Albert Wilson, if they are headed to that way, like he could be a little bit more useful than some of the holdovers from the last regime, the BC Johnsons, who's a very typical wide receiver, right? He plays a very like what you'd expect from a wide receiver's game like that. And Ihmir Smith-Marsette, who knows if he'll be available now. But both Thielen and Jefferson are more typical receivers. KJ Osborne is a slot, but he's a big slot. And he's not like an after catch guy. He did have that one really sick 3rd and 10 in week 1 last year. That was dope. But I like, you don't think of him as like a bubble screen dude. I think of him more as a downfield guy. So a little bit of the short, make a guy miss in space types kind of tracks with what I've been sort of thinking about this offense. And also the best guy we have on the whole team in space, one of the best guys in the whole league in space at getting the ball and then making a singular dude miss in space is Dalvin Cook. And so getting him out into the flats and getting him, passes over the middle and stuff, getting him as sneaky ways to get him into the second level is great. The thing about that, and y'all are going to really like this, is that means you're setting up passes with other passes. So that could be a Kirk Cousins throwing 50 times a game kind of game plan. And he's throwing them all 4-yard passes, so the yards per attempt goes way down. But, you don't care about that, right? You're plodding the ball down the field, and you're just replacing the run game with shorter passes, which might strike fear into your heart because you might remember that was a John DeFilippo thing. And yes, it was. Let's hope it's better this time. That's one of the reservations that I had about Kevin O'Connell from the very beginnings was that he's going to bring this because he thinks this is the way offense should be. He got in a whole big tiff in Washington over wanting to pass more, and Washington didn't want to pass more. And it was like the same thing going on in 2018 in Minnesota, where they wanted to pass more and Zimmer didn't want to pass more. And when DeFilippo just kind of started going rogue and calling it his way, those were 2 of the most catastrophic games Kirk Cousins had, not in interceptions, but the offense just totally stagnated. And that might be DeFilippo just being a bad pass game coordinator. Look at what he's doing in Chicago. It's it's like an abject catastrophe. So fair, right? Might just be him not being very good at it. And I wouldn't say that Kevin O'Connell's the same guy as JDF. But it's something to think about. Is this truly a good fit for Kirk Cousins, or should Kirk Cousins be in a roll you out of the pocket type system? However you get there, whether it's outside zone bootlegs or sprint outs or whatever, get this dude on the run, moving side to side and throwing from those platforms. You can get all the advantages of that without any of the disadvantages that quarterbacks usually suffer, because that's like the best thing Kirk Cousins has. And maybe you will have like more sprint outs and ways to get cheap yards and stuff like that. I don't know. But I want to switch gears now, and I'm going to be so interested to watch this stuff in training camp. Like, what are they drilling? What are they making the wide receivers do? Are they teaching the wide receivers 4-yard button hooks, or are they teaching them how to, release against press for a go route, that kind of stuff? What are they drilling, and what are they doing? Like, I'm so interested to see the texture of this offense, and then especially once we get into games. But I want to switch gears. Yesterday I ranted a lot about the human side of football and how I don't think that gets enough attention. When it does get attention, it's the NFL draft, like soft music. You could practically hear Sarah McLachlan singing in the background as they tour their destroyed house in some hurricane or something. And it's like very clearly just monetizing their tragedy without much real care for who those people are. I want to tell you the story of Vidarian Lowe. And his story is insane. He has been through a lot. He's been very reliable and dependable to those around him through all of it. And I want to feature him. I think he is a person worth celebrating, I guess. So we're going to do that for the rest of the show. But first, let me talk to you about Grambling. Do you think this offense will work out? Because beats me, man. Who knows, right? But if you think go bet on it. And you can bet on it at betonline.net. You can bet on anything. You can bet on win totals. Vikings are at 8.5 last I checked. Over under 8.5 wins. You can bet on who you think the MVP will be. Right now, Justin Herbert is the leader in the clubhouse. So if you think it's going to be someone else, go bet on that person. You'll get at least plus 600 odds. You can bet on, of course, basketball, hockey playoffs going strong right now. You can even play your favorite Vegas casino games. All of that is at betonline.net, where the game starts. Every other year that I've been the host of Locked On Vikings, the summer has been a time for stories like this. The backstories of people. I kind of think of it as their journey to the NFL. How did they get here, and where do they go? Now what are they looking at? And I'm still going to do a lot of that, even though I've sort of replaced that series with a lot of the history stories that I've been telling. But I still do want to do some of that for some of the select newcomers that I decide. I don't know, probably will just be arbitrary who gets covered. But I definitely wanted to cover Vidarian Lowe, the tackle out of Illinois. Most people don't know a lot about him, which makes sense. He's a 6th-round tackle. He's not going to get a ton of press. But when you start looking into him and you start seeing what he's done and been through and how he's handled it, he's one of those people that you just get the utmost respect for. And like to the point, like I kind of couldn't, well, I definitely care if I'm rooting for him super hard to make the team. But if he doesn't, he's one of those people that's like, yeah, but you'll be fine. You're the kind of person, you'll be fine. But let me start that off by taking you back to Vidarian Lowe in high school. He has a younger half brother, 7 years younger. So they're a little bit different, but they grew up really, really close. And they love to rib on each other and be brothers and whatever. And they're into different things. Vidarian Lowe is a jock, obviously. And his brother Vidalis is more of a nerd, that likes playing video games and watching anime. But they still get along, and they're very, very close. And they're also close to their shared mother, Vanika Cockrell. That was the family dynamic when Vidarian Lowe went to Illinois. When he went to Illinois, he missed all of his first training camp he was recovering from meniscus surgery. And we've talked a lot on this show about what that can do to like a player's season. Like we saw that with Wyatt Davis. He missed most of camp with injury and it totally set him behind and he messed up. And now we've learned that the same thing kind of happened with Kellen Mond, but it was COVID, and COVID made him lose a bunch of weight and stuff, and he couldn't get that back, and you just are so behind, and it messes you up. What if you were just told, deal with it, you're starting anyways. That's what Vidarian Lowe did as a true freshman in 2017 for the Fighting Illini. Now, the Illini are not exactly the program you want to model your behavior after, especially not in those days. But he did make the Big Ten Network's all freshman team, and he rose to that challenge. And essentially, his entire life, kind of starting from college, this is where a lot of the life altering events have happened to him. Basically, all he does is rise to challenges. It's like all he ever has time to do. And for him, everything moves a lot faster than he ever intends it to. He did not intend to be starting his first year as a true freshman. Like very few players start as a true freshman for a Big Ten program, Power Five program. Similarly, you go to college and you don't expect to meet your wife like right away, but that is what happened. He met the woman he would marry. Her name's Haley, and they stayed up all night chit-chatting one night, and they just realized that they just had so much of a connection, and they both knew like instantly. They were like, "Yep, this is forever." And it was one of those. And it's not like love at first sight; it's love at first all night conversation. and through the rest of the kind of trials and tribulations, Haley has been, by his side and a supportive partner. And it's all a very wholesome. Watching this family grow is very, like, you're just rooting for him. So fast forward to middle of the 2018 football season. Vidarian Lowe gets some news from Haley. Surprise, we're going to have a kid. That was not in the plan either. But, it's probably not in the plan for many college kids, but they went with it. And all of a sudden, Vidarian Lowe, who's already a bit of a big brother thing, and he feels this responsibility to, care for his family in the way that most 20-something guys do, especially when you have younger siblings. You have that responsibility and the responsibility to be a good partner, and now add fatherhood, and you're also trying to be a good player. By the way, through all of this, Vidarian Lowe didn't miss a game. He's got like a crazy start streak, and that's kind of what everybody talked about with him in the draft. But the fact that he didn't miss a game for any of this, and he was always there and present and playing at a high level is insane. Man, I'm not that kind of, I would have taken a day off. All right. I'm sorry. I would have got cut for it probably, but I don't think I had it in me to not take it. I have it in me to not take a day off with this kind of couple of years that he had. So in May of 2019, Vidarian Lowe and Haley, I don't know her maiden name, Haley, she's now Haley Lowe, have their son, Kingston. 2 months later, Vanika Cockrell passes away of complications due to an enlarged heart. Vidarian Lowe loses his mother, and so does Vidalis. It's one thing to grieve. It's another thing entirely to grieve and then realize that your baby half-brother doesn't have any parents anymore. Vidalis's father wasn't really in the picture, and so he was too young still to be on his own. He was only 14 years old, or I think he was 12 at the time. And so Vidarian Lowe and Haley talk about it, and they have one of those conversations where they both know exactly what conclusion they're going to come to, but you still got to have the conversation. They're going to take him in. And so the family grows. 2 months ago, they did not have any dependents, and now they have two. It's a 2-year process, a really long, boring process to actually obtain legal guardianship over someone. And Vidarian Lowe was awarded that last year. Also last year, kid number 2. So things just kind of kept on happening, and it made for this really, really tough decision last year, before the 2021 season. Vidarian Lowe was eligible and could have declared for the 2021 draft. And that's a hard decision for every college prospect. It's this kind of crossroads in your life where you go, do I want to go back? Do I want to do the college thing more? Or is it time to start making money? And there's a strategy to it. Am I at the peak of my value right now? Or will it grow if I play another year? But if I play that other year and I get hurt, it's going to sink. And so there's this strategy to all of it. And Vidarian Lowe decides he's going to go back to school. He says it's one of the hardest decisions he ever had to make, because that is basically putting a delay on your NFL money. And you have a lot of people to provide for here. And for him, and if you ask Haley, when Haley said, "Hey, I'm pregnant with what would eventually be Kingston," his whole demeanor and attitude toward football changes. Now it's not a thing that I got my scholarship on. It's not an activity. Now it's livelihood. Now it's everything. Now it's providing. Now every practice I have to do this, not because I want to like be good at the game or whatever, but because I have to be everything that I possibly can be for my kids. Now there's a fire, and that fire probably will be around for his entire career. And so that's why I'm rooting for this kid a lot, because he has shouldered so many burdens on top of the ones that he has to shoulder himself. I mean, grieving your mother and, dealing with the stresses of being a new father and all that, and also shouldering the burdens of everybody around you. He is a rock. He's an anchor. And I am super rooting for the kid. He probably is competing for a roster spot with Blake Brandel in this particular training camp, if there is a roster spot at all for a tackle after Oli Udoh and the two starters, or maybe he can beat out Oli Udoh and be tackle 3 if he's really good. He has already collected almost $200,000 of a signing bonus, which that'll do it for that'll pay for a couple of rent checks, right? So that there's already some money when you get drafted that you can kind of celebrate. But the real money is if he makes the team, because then he starts earning a over $3 million contract, and that's the real money. That's the NFL money that'll buy you a pack of diapers or two. And so I'm really rooting for Vidarian Lowe to make the team. I would love to see him come in and really blow up and really become one of those reliable, dependable backup tackles. And he's not going to get a starting job over O'Neal or anything. He just went to a Pro Bowl, but be one of those reliable tackles that can be on the team for all 4 years, collect all your money, and carve out a career in the NFL that way. That would make me very happy. I would be very happy for Vidarian and his entire growing constantly. I think I want to get into some more history stuff tomorrow. I haven't done any this week, so we'll get into it. So make sure you come around for that. I'll see y'all tomorrow. And as always, Skull.